Okay guys, I have cleaned out this room. I want to show you what this arts and crafts room will look like. We've got our arts and crafts door, a single panel door, which would have shown up in the catalogs in the early 1900s, right? We are putting together a package from Windsor One, okay? So this is the Windsor Classical Craftsman package, and there's some key details I really want to highlight and show you. One, if you're into the preservation side of things, the picture rail, right, which is this molding here, is really a key molding. And what I've done is I put ours up at about 9 feet, okay? Now, what we see in our area is typically that just under the ceiling height, right, they'll put this picture rail. And that would allow room for them to put hooks and then hang their pictures, right? Think that in the 1920s, 1900s, it was plaster walls. They didn't have sheetrock back then. So nailing into plaster was sometimes like nailing into stone. And so they didn't do that very well. So almost everything in this period was, even up into the 1930s, was the picture rail in most rooms, even bedrooms. So this is really the crown, okay, in that period. If you're gonna do, and this is historic stuff, crown really wasn't used like it's used today, okay? It really wasn't as important a molding. And so the base, the casing, beam ceilings, right, that was very popular, but typically what you'd see in kind of the everyman house is a picture rail like this, right, that was hung just below the ceiling so they could still put the hooks up and hang pictures. The other real key detail is this window stool, okay? Now, I really pushed for both Kukin and Windsor to make sure that we had a big beefy stool. You see in our building, which is 1920s, that window stool is, almost 2 inches thick, right? This gives the kind of heft, and sometimes these window stools in lumber catalogs are like 3/4 of an inch or 5/8 of an inch. They really don't project like this. This is the way windows used to be trimmed out, and that whole picture framing a window, there's really not an historic precedent for that until you get into the 1950s and 60s. And so almost all windows, and remember in my last video we talked about window sills and that the window sill oftentimes lined up with the chair rail in traditional houses. Same thing's true here. This is a unifying line that runs around the room. So if we're going to do a package like this, right, it's not only important to get the moldings and the sizes right, but you really also need to get these other details to really create an authentic interior. Now, we'll go back here, and essentially what we've done is we're taking this Windsor package, I've taken the base mold, and we've got a plinth in this package, okay? The plinth molding goes back to that Victorian era. Remember when we did the Victorian moldings, we have this huge, big, tall 12-inch plinth. This is kind of a holdover from that era, so we're going to put our plinth in, and the moldings drop in just behind it. Notice this base doesn't stick outside of here. It actually sticks behind there for nice shadow lines. I'm going to line up my plinth right in the middle. So the plinth is a little bit bigger, right, than the casing, and it should sit in the middle, and then we'll put this on either side, right? So I'll put my plinth on this side, nail it in, put my casing on. What you're going to see here is we've got a header that goes over top of this. And this header detail really goes back to the Victorian era. And so I actually went to my local salvage yard and found an historic header, right? So you'll see these headers in a number of different periods. It really starts in kind of the late Victorian. You start seeing them in the 1890s, right, into the 1920s. The Victorian ones are a little bit more elaborate. You'll see this bead underneath is a little bit different. It acts as a kind of a mini entablature, right? Here's the top of your architrave that would have been down here. Here's your frieze, here's your cornice, right? So there's a little bit of a classical element there, but that's what this is. It's a Victorian one. I'm telling you this because you can have different traditions and different styles. If I went back to this 1900 catalog, right? 1905, 1908, look at all the different styles here. And because of that Victorian era, you'd actually see some bead and reel, you'd see some applied carving, right? So there's a number of different ways to do this. We did a job for a very famous person, I can't say Barbara Streisand, and we did these headers for her in her house, right? Where we copied that little, a little dental detail, right? The little bead, right? Really pretty, right? And this would go right here above, okay? So this is our header. There's a lot of different ways to make this header cap. The actual Windsor one that we used comes from historic catalogs. So this is a 1927 catalog. when it would have been available. We've got the different parts and pieces, the cap, all moldings that can be used for different stuff as you work on and build your house. So this will go right over top of here. Now we've got a really pretty door, right? And so I know you guys like to do this arts and crafts thing, and it's real popular right now, and appropriately so. It's a handsome design, but there's the way this package lays out. Now, let's say you wanted to elevate, right, the room. Let's say you go into the house and you want to do some cool stuff. Now, if we go back to the catalogs, we can see some things that they did in here. Beam ceilings, as I said, were really important, but you'll also see wainscoting and plate rails. Now, if you wanted to elevate the space, there's this wonderful little picture in this molding catalog from the 1914, right? Notice what's happening here. We've got a pretty little built-in hutch, we've got a beam ceiling, right? There's actually a picture rail underneath there. And then look at this. We've got this this tall wainscot, we'll talk about that in a second, and a plate rail. Now, there is a number of different ways to do plate rails. In fact, they had a number of different examples in here of how that worked. We built one. This is actually in our molding catalog. It has these grooves on top, right? And they're angled so that a plate can sit in here and not, fall away or not break. But this would sit at the top of a wainscot, and then you'd have plates. Sometimes I've seen beer steins, sometimes I've seen some other things, and they would run around the room at different heights. This is one I found at my local salvage yard, right? They've got 3 grooves that come in here, different plates that can sit in here. Notice they've got a bed mold underneath and this back piece. Now what we've got to determine is what height that we want it at, right? I don't want to subordinate that casing, so I want to be underneath that, right? I want to be, somewhere in kind of this range, right? In this room, 9-foot ceilings, kind of this height. Now, I talked about wainscot in one of my last videos and the height of it. And in traditional houses, how the ideal height is maybe 28 to 32. But because of this arts and crafts edition, there is this English flavor where you have this tall wainscot. This is not one of those things that applies to those classical rules, okay? We're not punctuating the space, we're actually decorating the walls. And so the way I want to do that, and what I want to show you is kind of how to panel out this wall and what that would look like. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm going to build really tall panels across here, okay? And the great thing about the arts and crafts edition is you don't have to have molded profiles, right? I'm going to just use 1x stock. Now, I'm going to be a little bit thinner because I think if I put a 3/4 inch board on here, it's going to look a little fat. So I've got a 1/2 inch board that we're going to use to build our panel, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my base on here, and I actually don't want the base to be part of the stiles and rails. I want just a little step between my molding and my base, okay? So I'm going to create a little line here. And what I'm going to do is I've cut these pieces here to run along here, okay, and to create my height. And I'm going to be about 18 inches between. And it's actually really important, this dimension and this distance. We don't want fat squares, okay, because your eye is actually going to be reading these squares. So I don't want a square that's this big, okay? I want to put this thing about 18 inches apart so that this creates this vertical rectangle that really builds height in here, okay? So here's an example of how wainscoting can build height. Now I'm going to pick my top rail, right? Build this across here. And then we're going to put our plate rail on top, right? Right here, right? And now you've got a really pretty way to elevate your dining room or kind of an important space in an arts and crafts house. We've got this doorway which kicks up over top of it. That creates hierarchy. We know where we're supposed to go, right? This could be a cased opening, the same thing. Our plate rail's just a little bit below that, and that pronounces this door, right? So the same thing could happen with the windows. This kind of wainscoting pattern, this kind of plate rail, really can elevate an arts and crafts space. So the other thing is, guys, if you are, being a purist, okay, this would all be stain grade wood, right? This would be like this, right? That was kind of part of that tradition and that arts and crafts period that as opposed to the Victorian, which was, heavily painted and gilded, right? You had this very natural purity of wood and things like that. So, in a true arts and crafts space, and I know that wasn't a popular thing for long because I've gone into too many arts and crafts houses and flicked off the paint and realized that originally they were stained. But sometimes those spaces just get too dark, right? And they seem too heavy and masculine, so not everybody does it anymore. But purest sense, this would have been stain grade, right? Today, it still looks really pretty and attractive to keep it paint grade. As long as you get these proportions and scale right, you should have a magical space. All right, guys, so arts and crafts, right? That whole philosophy, right? How it's put together. Notice that these moldings are fairly unadorned, right? There's no carving, there's not a lot of steps, there's not a lot of buildup. It's a simple design style. I think it's one reason why it's so popular today when we get into this minimalism and kind of simple designs that people appreciate. Great shadow lines in this thing. Kukin and Windsor both have a great arts and crafts line that you can use on your projects. They're all over the country if you want to reach out to those guys. Hey, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. A lot of behind the scenes things we're doing there that really will hopefully improve the quality of your building, show you some of our tricks and techniques. Be sure to sign up for the newsletter. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.